The satellite feed cut out at 3:47 hours, and when it flickered back online 6 minutes later, the analysts at Bagram Air Base went silent. What they saw shouldn't have been possible. An A-10 Thunderbolt II, call sign Revenant 21, was emerging from a canyon in Helmand Province that wasn't supposed to exist on any tactical map. The aircraft's titanium bathtub, the armored cockpit that made Warthogs nearly indestructible, was glowing orange in the thermal imaging heat signature bleeding across the wings like molten veins. The left engine was completely gone, just a jagged socket trailing black smoke. The right stabilizer hung by cables, and somehow, impossibly, the aircraft was still flying. Inside the Tactical Operations Center, a Navy SEAL team leader named Kale Bronson stopped mid-briefing, his pointer frozen against the projection screen. His team had called for close air support 40 minutes ago, 12 miles inside enemy territory, surrounded by 200 Taliban fighters in a valley that intelligence had assured them was lightly defended. The pilot who'd answered that call had a reputation nobody wanted to discuss directly. Her name was Captain Iris Volkov, former Air National Guard, recalled to active duty after 3 years flying cargo routes in Alaska. The other pilots called her threadbare, behind her back a reference to her habit of accepting missions nobody else would touch, flying through conditions that violated every safety protocol in the book. Some said it was recklessness. Others said it was a death wish. What nobody said, at least not in official reports, was that she'd lost her younger brother in a medevac crash 2 years prior, and that every mission since had carried the weight of atonement she'd never been offered. The radio crackled with her voice now, calm and measured despite what the satellite feed was showing. Boneyard actual Revenant 2-1, I'm RTB with battle damage. Hydraulics are shot, I'm on manual reversion for flight controls. Fuel state is critical but stable. I'll need the barrier net and every fire truck you've got. The controller's response came fast, professional, but edged with concern. Revenant 2-1, copy all. Barrier net is being rigged now. Souls on board. There was a pause, just long enough for the thermal image to show the A-10 dip slightly before correcting. One soul, but I'm bringing back 12 more who wouldn't have made it otherwise. Bronson's jaw tightened. His team was alive because of her. All 12 operators, extracted under fire while she'd made gun runs so low the Taliban had switched from rifles to throwing rocks. And now this pilot, this woman his intel officer had dismissed as past her prime during the mission brief, was flying a dying aircraft through the mountains with the kind of precision that required not just skill but something deeper, something that looked like faith. A-10 Warthog was never meant to be beautiful. It was designed around a gun, the GAU-8 Avenger, a 7-barrel rotary cannon that could fire depleted uranium rounds through a tank's armor like paper. Everything about the aircraft was brutal, utilitarian, built for one purpose: keeping soldiers alive by destroying everything that threatened them. The pilots who flew them understood this relationship intimately. They weren't there to dogfight or drop precision munitions from 30,000 feet. They were there to get dirty, to fly low and slow through the worst the enemy could throw at them, and to come home with stories written in bullet holes and shrapnel scars. Iris Volkov understood this better than most. She'd grown up in Fairbanks, daughter of a Russian immigrant mechanic who taught her that machines had souls, that if you listened carefully they'd tell you what they needed. Her brother Dmitri had believed the same thing, right up until the moment his Black Hawk's engine failed over the Hindu Kush, and he'd ridden it down trying to save his crew. 3 survived. He didn't. After the funeral, Iris had requested reassignment to combat operations, but the Air Force had other plans. They needed experienced pilots for logistics, for the unglamorous work of moving supplies across Alaska's brutal terrain. She'd agreed because she had to, because fighting the decision meant losing her wings entirely. But she'd also started taking every additional qualification she could find, every certification that might get her back into a cockpit that mattered. When the recall came, it wasn't because anyone believed in her potential. It was because they were desperate. The A-10 fleet was aging, and the pilots qualified to fly them were retiring faster than new ones could be trained. Iris was certified, available, and willing to deploy on 72 hours' notice. That was enough. Her arrival at Bagram had been met with the kind of polite skepticism reserved for replacements nobody requested. The other pilots were younger, mostly men, graduates of training pipelines that emphasized multi-role fighters and network-centric warfare. The A-10 was a relic to them, a Cold War beast kept alive by congressional lobbying and sentimentality. And Iris, at 37 with gray already threading through her dark hair, seemed like exactly the kind of pilot who'd end up flying one competent enough to avoid disasters, not valuable enough to waste on anything important. She'd done nothing to challenge that assessment during her first 2 weeks. She flew her assigned missions, returned without incident, filed reports that were thorough and unremarkable. She didn't join the younger pilots for drinks at the makeshift bar. She didn't participate in the endless debates about tactics and technology that filled the ready room during downtime. She just flew, maintained her equipment with the obsessive care her father had taught her, and waited. The call from Bronson's team had come through at 3:12 hours, priority flash traffic that bypassed normal request channels. They were compromised, taking fire from 3 sides, pinned down in terrain that made helicopter extraction impossible until the enemy positions could be suppressed. The quick reaction force was 30 minutes out. The AC-130 gunship that should have been their primary support had mechanical issues and was grounded. They needed close air support, and they needed it now, and they needed a pilot crazy enough to fly into a valley where the mountains rose 3,000 feet on either side, and the enemy had already proven they could hit aircraft at low altitude. The mission planner had looked at the request, looked at the weather data showing high winds and reduced visibility, looked at the terrain map that showed exactly why this was a terrible idea, and then looked at the roster of available pilots. Most were already committed to other missions. 2 were down with food poisoning. That left 3, and of those 3, only one had raised her hand when asked who was willing to take it. Iris hadn't hesitated, hadn't asked for time to consider or for additional support. She just stood, grabbed her helmet, and walked toward the flight line while the mission planner was still pulling together the brief. By the time the formal tasking order was generated, she was already in the cockpit running her pre-flight checks. The A-10 that morning was tail number 537, an aircraft that had been flying since 1979 and bore the scars of 45 years of service. Iris walked around it slowly in the pre-dawn darkness, her flashlight playing across panels that had been replaced, repaired, reinforced countless times. There were bullet holes from Desert Storm, patched but visible. Hydraulic line replacements from Afghanistan, marked with fresh safety wire. A turbine blade replacement from last month that was already accumulating carbon stains. The crew chief, a staff sergeant named Marcus Webb who'd been maintaining A-10s longer than Iris had been flying them, stood by with his arms crossed. "She's good to go, ma'am. Fresh hydraulic fluid, APU checks out, both Maverick rails are loaded. You're carrying the full combat load 1,100 rounds for the gun, full defensive suite." Iris nodded, her gloved hand resting on the fuselage just below the cockpit. The metal was cold, almost frozen in the night air. "What's her history, Sergeant? How many combat sorties?" Webb consulted his tablet. 4,217 confirmed, 3,000 of those in direct combat support. She's taken battle damage 14 times, never failed to bring her pilot home. Good record. Best bird on the line, ma'am. Ugly as hell, tough as they come. Iris smiled slightly. "Then we'll get along fine." The pre-flight was meditation and muscle memory combined. Iris's hands moved through the switches and checks with practiced efficiency while her mind stayed present, aware of every response, every indicator, every sound the aircraft made. The engines spooled up with their characteristic turbine whine, not the roar of fighters but something lower, more purposeful. She could feel the vibration through her seat, through the stick, through every connection point between pilot and machine. The armament systems came online, the GAU-8's barrels rotating through their test cycle with mechanical precision, the Maverick missiles reporting ready status, the countermeasure dispensers confirming full loads. Everything worked exactly as it should, and yet Iris found herself speaking quietly to the aircraft anyway, words her father had used before every flight. "Take care of me, and I'll take care of you." The tower cleared her for immediate departure. No questions about mission planning or weather concerns, or the fact that she was launching into conditions that had grounded less urgent sorties. They just needed someone in the air, someone willing to do what needed doing. Iris advanced the throttles and felt the A-10 surge forward, heavy with fuel and weapons, accelerating down the runway with the determined momentum of something that had never learned how to quit. The flight to the target area took 18 minutes, following valleys where possible, climbing over ridgelines where necessary, always staying low where radar coverage couldn't reach. The terrain was spectacular, and merciless mountains that scraped the sky, valleys carved by ancient rivers, villages that clung to hillsides like barnacles. In daylight it might have been beautiful. At night, in weather that was degrading toward the minimums for visual flight, it was a maze that demanded absolute concentration. Iris flew with her instruments and her intuition both, trusting neither completely, cross-checking everything. The radio was quiet except for the occasional position report, the tactical frequency reserved for urgent traffic. Then Bronson's voice cut through, professional but compressed with stress. "Any station this net, any station this net, this is Razor 23. We are in contact, taking effective fire from grid November Sierra 4257. Request immediate close air support, danger close, authorized terminal attack control. We are critically low on ammunition and unable to move." Iris keyed her mic. "Razor 23, Revenant 21. I'm 5 minutes out with full combat load. Give me a target description and your position marked." The relief in Bronson's voice was audible even through the static. "Revenant, Razor. Targets are fortified positions on 3 sides of our location, approximately 50 to 70 enemy fighters per position. They're dug in, heavy weapons, mortars. We're in a depression at the valley floor, marked with infrared strobe. Friendlies are within 200 meters of all targets." 200 meters was nothing. At the speeds even an A-10 flew, that was less than 2 seconds of travel time. Iris could already feel the geometry of the attack forming in her mind: approach angles, weapon selection, the timing required to deliver ordnance accurately without catching Bronson's team in the blast radius. "Razor, Revenant, copy, danger close. I'll need continuous talk-on for every pass. Confirm your authorized terminal control." "Affirm, Revenant." "I am qualified JTAC, authorized terminal control. First target is the northern position, marked by my laser. They're in a tree line, heavy machine gun position, been hammering us for 20 minutes. Iris descended lower, flying by the faint green glow of her night vision goggles now, the terrain rising around her like walls. She could see the infrared strobe ahead, poolsing in the darkness, and then the emerald point of Bronson's laser designator painting a cluster of trees. The range finder clicked down 3,000 meters, 2,000, 1,000. At 800 meters she saw the muzzle flashes from the enemy position, bright starbursts in her goggles. They were firing at Bronson's team, completely unaware that death was approaching from behind at 300 knots. Iris armed the GAU-8, selected high explosive incendiary rounds, and rolled into the attack run with the smoothness of long practice. The gun fired with a sound that was felt more than heard, a buzzsaw roar that shook the entire airframe. 2-second burst, 60 rounds downrange, each one the size of a milk bottle. The tree line disintegrated. Iris pulled up hard, pushing the aircraft through a climbing turn that stressed the damaged airframe, feeling the controls respond sluggishly but adequately. Behind her, secondary explosions bloomed as the ammunition in the enemy position cooked off. Bronson's voice came through immediately. Good hits, northern position is neutralized. Stand by for next target, eastern ridge line." She reversed her turn, coming around for the second pass while scanning for threats. Their three separate muzzle flashes from the ridge, aiming not at Bronson but up, tracking her path across the sky. They'd figured out she was there. The A-10's radar warning receiver lit up, surface-to-air threats detected, older systems but still deadly at close range. Iris dropped chaff and flares automatically, trusting the defensive systems while focusing on the attack. The eastern ridge was a harder target, fighters positioned among rocks that would provide cover from anything but a direct hit. She selected a Maverick missile, let the seeker head lock onto the cluster of heat signatures and fired. The missile streaked away, trailing fire, and impacted directly in the center of the position. The explosion was larger than she'd expected. They must have had munitions stored there. The entire ridge face seemed to lift and collapse, rocks tumbling down the slope in an avalanche of destruction. Revenant, that's a shack. Eastern position is gone. Last target is western side, troops in the open. They're maneuvering to flank us. Troops in the open meant the gun again, meant getting low and slow where they could shoot back, meant accepting risk that no training manual would recommend. Iris didn't hesitate. She dove toward the western slope, dropping like a stone until she was barely 300 feet above the valley floor, so close she could see individual figures running between cover positions. They saw her to every weapon that could elevate turned skyward, tracers rising toward her in streams of green and red. Iris felt the impacts before she heard them, metallic thuds as rounds struck the airframe. The right engine temperature spiked, damage warnings illuminated. She ignored them, focused entirely on the gun's sight, on the running figures now centering in her HUD. The GAU-8 fired again, longer bursts this time, tracking left to right across the slope. The effect was catastrophic. Fighters disappeared into pink mist, positions were shredded, the entire western approach dissolved into chaos and retreat. But Iris was taking hits continuously now, the airframe shuddering with impacts, something important failing in the electrical system. She pulled up, gaining altitude, and that's when the right engine failed completely. Not a gradual degradation, but an instant loss of power, turbine seizure, warning tones screaming in her headset. The A-10 yawed hard right. Iris compensated with rudder, brought the aircraft back under control. But she was flying on one engine now, in mountains, at night, with battle damage she hadn't fully assessed. Bronson's voice cut through her concentration. "Revenant, you're hit. We can see flames from the right engine. Get out of here, you've done enough. Quick reaction force is inbound." Iris checked her instruments through the chaos of warning lights. The left engine was still producing thrust. Fuel was stable though decreasing faster than it should be. Hydraulics were degrading but functional. She could make it back to base. Probably. But Bronson's team was still pinned, still taking fire from scattered positions she hadn't hit, and the quick reaction force was 20 minutes out. 20 minutes was a lifetime in a firefight. She made the decision in seconds. "Razor, Revenant, I'm staying on station until QRF arrives. Talk to me, what else needs killing?" There was a pause, and she could almost feel Bronson's conflict through the radio gratitude and guilt in equal measure. "Revenant, you need to egress. We can hold." "Razor, I didn't ask if you could hold. I asked what needs killing." Another pause. Then quieter. "There's a mortar position northeast of our location, been dropping rounds on us since the start. We can't see it, but we can hear the tube firing." A mortar position meant insurgents with discipline and training, dangerous enough to be Bronson's real problem. Iris turned toward the northeast bearing, flying lower now to stay below the ridgelines, scanning through her targeting pod's infrared display. There, a cluster of heat signatures in a wadi, sheltered from ground observation but visible from above. She watched for 30 seconds, saw the bright flash of a mortar round being fired, counted the crew. 6 men working with practiced efficiency. They'd been doing this for hours, probably responsible for most of the casualties Bronson's team had taken. Iris armed her last Maverick, locked the target, considered the approach angle. The wadi was narrow, steep-sided. She'd have to come in along its axis, pull up hard at the last second to avoid the far wall. With 2 engines, that would be routine. With 1 engine and battle damage, it was gambling with margins she didn't have. She fired anyway. The missile tracked true, impacting dead center in the mortar position. When the smoke cleared, there was nothing left but scorched earth. Revenant Razor, that's all of them. All enemy positions are neutralized or retreating. You've given us everything we needed. Iris pulled back on the stick, beginning the long climb out of the valley. The left engine was running hot now, temperature gauge creeping toward the red line. Warning tones were persistent hydraulics, electrical, fuel pressure, a dozen systems reporting degradation or failure. The A-10 was dying around her, giving everything it had to get her home, but asking for her attention with every alert. She silenced the tones, focused on flying. The return flight was an exercise in managing cascading failures. First, the hydraulics went from degraded to critical, forcing Iris to switch to manual reversion direct mechanical linkage between her control stick and the flight surfaces. No power assist, every input requiring physical force. Then the electrical system started shedding loads, non-essential systems dropping offline automatically to preserve power for critical flight instruments. The fuel leak she'd suspected became confirmed when the flow rate didn't match consumption, somewhere in the wing system bleeding precious JP8 into the slipstream. She did the math quickly, calculating range versus fuel remaining, and came up with an answer that depended on everything going perfectly from here on out. Everything did not go perfectly. 20 miles from Bagram, the left engine's temperature finally exceeded limits, turbine blades beginning to fail. Iris had to reduce power, sacrificing airspeed for engine survival, gliding more than flying now. The A-10 was a glider the way a brick was a glider, technically possible, practically terrifying. She could see the base's lights ahead now, brilliant white pools in the darkness. The tower was calling her, urgent questions about her status, her fuel state, her hydraulics. She answered mechanically, professional despite the sweat running down her face, despite the way her arms ached from forcing the controls. Revenant 2-1, I am declaring an emergency. Single engine, manual reversion, fuel critical, all hydraulic systems failed. Requesting barrier net and full emergency response. The barrier net was already being positioned, a massive nylon web stretched across the runway, designed to catch aircraft that couldn't stop normally. It was a last resort, destructive to the aircraft, dangerous to the pilot, but infinitely better than the alternatives. Iris lined up on final approach, the runway growing larger in her windscreen, everything reduced to this final problem: get the aircraft on the ground intact. The left engine chose that moment to fail completely, a violent compressor stall that sent shrapnel through the nacelle. Suddenly she had no thrust, no power, just momentum and gravity. The A-10 dropped like a stone. Iris pulled back on the stick with everything she had, bleeding off airspeed to arrest the descent, flaring at the last possible second. The aircraft hit hard, main gear first, then nose gear, bouncing once before settling. She was going too fast, far too fast for the barrier net to be safe. But there were no other options now. The net caught the aircraft at 120 knots, the nylon cables stretching, absorbing energy, decelerating the A-10 with forces that slammed Iris forward against her harness hard enough to crack ribs. Metal screamed, the landing gear collapsed, sparks flew in great sheets as the aircraft's belly ground across concrete. And then, after an eternity compressed into seconds, everything was still. The fire trucks arrived before Iris could fully process that she was alive. Crash crews surrounded the aircraft, foam spraying, flashlights searching for flames that never came. The A-10 had held together, just barely, its titanium bathtub protecting her even in this final violence. Iris sat in the cockpit for a long moment, hands still on the controls, breathing in ragged gasps. Then she began the shutdown procedure, muscle memory taking over even though half the switches were dead. The canopy opened with manual release, fresh air flooding in, carrying the smell of burnt rubber and fire suppressant and jet fuel. Strong hands helped her out, flight surgeons and crew chiefs working together to extract her from the wreckage. Her legs didn't want to hold her weight at first. They caught her, supported her, guided her away from the aircraft toward the waiting ambulance. But Iris stopped, turned back to look. The A-10 was destroyed, landing gear collapsed, belly torn open, both engines ruined, the right wing's fuel tank completely gone. It would never fly again. And yet it had brought her home, kept its promise right to the end. "Ma'am, we need to get you checked out." The flight surgeon's voice was gentle but firm. Iris nodded, let them guide her into the ambulance. But she kept her eyes on the aircraft until distance and darkness took it from view. Later in the base hospital, a doctor would tell her she had 3 cracked ribs, a concussion, and severe bruising. She would fill out the required paperwork, submit to the mandatory psychological evaluation, answer questions about her decisions in measured, professional terms. But in that moment, being lifted into the ambulance while crash crews worked around the dying aircraft, Iris felt something she hadn't felt since her brother's funeral, a sense of completion, of debt acknowledged if not repaid. She'd kept 12 soldiers alive. She'd brought a crippled aircraft home. She'd done what Dmitri hadn't been able to do. That would have to be enough. The rest came later, as these things do. Bronson and his team returned at dawn, and when they landed, they didn't head for debriefing. They went straight to the hospital, still in their combat gear, still carrying the dust of Helmand Province. Bronson found Iris in the recovery ward, sitting up in bed despite the pain, refusing the stronger medications because she didn't want the fog. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, this Navy SEAL who'd commanded missions across 3 combat deployments, who'd earned decorations for valor that he never mentioned, and he didn't seem to know how to start. Finally, he just said, "Captain Volkov, my team wanted me to give you this." He held out his hand. In his palm was a challenge coin, but not a standard one. It was custom-made, bearing the trident of the Navy SEALs on one side. On the other side was an A10 silhouette and 2 words, "Revenant's chosen." Iris took the coin, felt its weight, understood what it meant. The SEALs didn't give their trident to anyone. This was recognition beyond official channels, a warrior's acknowledgement of another warrior. "Your team made that?" she asked quietly. Bronson shook his head. "We made it last time we were stateside, 3 months ago. Been carrying it around waiting for the right pilot to give it to. Didn't think we'd find one." He paused. "Didn't think she'd be an A10 driver the brass had already written off." Iris smiled, painful with the cracked ribs. "They wrote me off years ago. I just forgot to stop flying." We all heard the call sign jokes, threadbare. Like you were barely holding together, taking missions nobody wanted because you had nothing left to lose. He met her eyes directly. "They were wrong. You took those missions because you had everything to lose and you did it anyway. That's not reckless. That's the opposite of reckless." Iris didn't have words for that, so she just nodded. Bronson straightened, gave her a nod that was almost a bow, and turned to leave. At the door he paused. "One more thing, ma'am. My team took a vote this morning. Unanimous decision. From now on, if we're calling for close air support, we ask for you specifically. We don't care what aircraft you're in, what the mission profile is, what the brass says about your career trajectory. We want you because now we know what threadbare really means. It means you'll hold together just long enough to get everyone else home safe." The story should have ended there, with recognition earned and respect given. A warrior returning to the routine of military service with her reputation transformed. But stories don't end just because the moment feels complete. They echo forward, creating ripples that become waves. Within 48 hours, word of the mission had spread throughout Bagram Air Base. Not through official channels. The mission reports were still being compiled, the gun camera footage still being reviewed. It spread through the informal network that existed in every military base, the gossip and legend that moved through ready rooms and maintenance hangars and mess halls. Pilots who dismissed Iris as past her prime found themselves listening to crew chiefs describe the damage to tail number 537, the impossibility of what she'd accomplished. The other A-10 pilots, the younger ones who thought close air support was something you did from 10,000 feet with precision munitions, started asking questions about her approach, her tactics, her thinking. The intelligence officers reviewed the gun camera footage frame by frame, calculating the accuracy required for her passes, the margin for error she'd worked within. And slowly, reluctantly, people began to revise their assumptions. The commander of the 455th Air Expeditionary Wing, was a colonel named Victoria Hayes, a career officer who'd flown F-16s in Desert Storm and understood both the politics and the realities of combat aviation. She came to see Iris on her third day in the hospital, unannounced, carrying a folder full of reports. "Captain Volkov, I'm told you're refusing the strong painkillers." Hayes pulled up a chair, sat without asking permission. "Yes, ma'am, they make it hard to think clearly." "Good, because we need to think clearly about what happens next." She opened the folder, pulled out a document. "This is the preliminary investigation into your mission. There are some questions about your decision-making, specifically about staying on station after taking battle damage, about making additional attack runs when you could have egressed safely." Iris felt her jaw tight. She'd expected this, the bureaucratic aftermath, the questions about risk and judgment. "Ma'am, the tactical situation required." Hayes raised a hand, cutting her off. "I'm not questioning your judgment, Captain. I'm telling you what the investigation says so you understand the official position." Unofficially, she leaned forward. "Unofficially, that was some of the finest combat flying I've seen in 30 years. You saved 12 operators who would otherwise be dead. You neutralized multiple enemy positions that intelligence didn't even know existed, and you brought back an aircraft that by all rights should have fallen out of the sky. The SEALs are calling you a legend. The ground commanders are asking why we don't have more pilots like you. And the mechanics are already planning to rebuild that A-10, just so they can put your name on it permanently." Iris blinked, surprised despite herself. "Rebuild it? Ma'am, that aircraft is a total loss. The gear collapsed, both engines are destroyed, the hydraulics. The titanium bathtub is intact. The airframe structure passed inspection. Everything else can be replaced." Hayes smiled slightly. "And it will be because apparently the Air Force has decided your mission is going to be the poster child for why we keep the A-10 in service despite every budget analyst wanting to retire the fleet. They're going to rebuild 537, fly it to stateside, put it on display as an example of what these aircraft can survive. Your name is going to be on the nose, whether you like it or not. I don't want recognition, ma'am. I just want to fly. I know, that's part of why you're getting it." Hayes pulled out another document, this one with more official-looking seals. "This is a transfer order. You're being reassigned to the 355th Fighter Squadron, effective immediately. You'll be training the next generation of A-10 pilots, specifically, teaching them the kind of close air support that wins battles instead of just checking boxes. You'll also be leading a tactical development team to update our doctrine for low-altitude, high-threat operations. The job comes with a promotion to major, immediate effect, and a permanent position that will keep you flying combat missions while also sharing what you know." Iris stared at the orders, trying to process what this meant. A week ago, she'd been a replacement pilot nobody wanted, flying missions because someone had to. Now she was being offered a position that would define the next phase of her career, give her influence over how an entire airframe would be employed. "Colonel, I'm not sure I'm qualified to—" "Captain Volkov." "Iris." Hayes's voice gentled slightly. "You've been underestimated your entire career. You've been shuffled into positions where you couldn't challenge anyone's assumptions, where your competence wouldn't threaten anyone's ego. You've accepted that because you love flying more than you care about recognition. But the military doesn't get better by keeping its best people hidden. It gets better by elevating them, by making sure their knowledge spreads instead of dies with them when they retire. This isn't a favor. This is the Air Force belatedly recognizing that they've been wasting a resource they can't afford to lose." She stood, placed the orders on Iris's bedside table. "Think about it, but not for too long. I need an answer within 48 hours. After Hayes left, Iris sat alone with the orders, reading them repeatedly, trying to see the trap she was certain must exist. But there was no trap, just an opportunity she'd stopped believing would come. The door opened again. This time it was Marcus Webb, the crew chief, still in his grease-stained coveralls. He looked uncomfortable in the sterile hospital environment, like a fish pulled onto shore. "Ma'am, sorry to bother you. Just wanted to let you know we started the paperwork to rebuild 537, Figured you'd want to know. Sergeant Webb. Iris gestured to the chair Hayes had vacated. The colonel told me. You really think it can be rebuilt? Websat nodded emphatically. Ma'am, that bird has more life in her than half the aircraft we're flying. The damage looks bad, but it's mostly replaceable components. Engines we can swap. Hydraulics we can rerun. Landing gear we can install from depot stock. The important part, the part that makes an A10 an A10, that's all intact. You showed what she could do. Now we're going to show what we can do to keep her flying. He pulled a notebook from his pocket, flipped it open. There's something else. The maintainers, all of us who work on the Warthogs, we've been talking. We want to start a tradition. Every aircraft that gets rebuilt from combat damage, we put the pilot's call sign on it permanently. Not just painted on the nose for a deployment, but etched into the airframe, metal on metal, so anyone who flies it after knows who proved what it could survive. Iris felt something tighten in her chest. Threadbare, you want to put that on an aircraft? No, ma'am. We want to put Revenant on it. That's your real call sign now, the one you earned. The one you earned. That phrase stayed with Iris long after Webb left, through the rest of her recovery, through the decision to accept Hayes's offer, through the move to her new squadron. She'd spent years believing that earning respect meant fitting in, meeting expectations, not making waves. But the mission in Helmand had taught her something different. Respect wasn't earned by conforming. It was earned by being exactly who you were, completely and without apology, especially when the circumstances demanded everything you had. The promotion ceremony was small, informal, held in a maintenance hangar with the gutted remains of tail number 537 visible in the background. Colonel Hayes pinned the major's oak leaves to Iris's uniform while the squadron assembled around them, pilots and maintainers, intelligence officers and ground commanders, even a delegation of SEALs led by Bronson who'd arranged leave specifically to attend. There were no speeches about heroism or valor, no lengthy descriptions of her actions. Hayes simply said, Major Volkov has demonstrated what we ask of all our pilots, the willingness to do what needs doing, regardless of the cost. She will now help us pass that standard to the next generation. The applause was genuine, unforced. These were people who understood what combat meant, what the gap between training and reality looked like. They applauded not just for what Iris had done, but for what she represented, proof that competence mattered more than perception, that the quiet professionals who did their jobs without fanfare were the ones who held everything together. Afterward, as people filtered out and the hangar emptied, Iris walked over to 537. The aircraft was skeletal now, stripped down to its essential structure, more sculpture than machine. Workers had already begun the rebuild, new engine mounts being fitted, hydraulic lines being run, electrical systems being installed. But the titanium bathtub was unchanged, still bearing the scorch marks and bullet impacts from that night in Helmand. She reached out, touched the metal, felt its coldness under her palm. Talking to machines again, Bronson's voice came from behind her. Your father's habit, Iris glanced back, smiled. He used to say machines remember who treats them right. They'll give you everything they have if you respect what they are. You respected this one all the way to destruction and back. Bronson moved to stand beside her, looking up at the damaged cockpit. My team talks about you constantly now. Not just about the mission, but about what it means. Most of them have been in combat for years, worked with dozens of pilots. They've seen competence, they've seen courage, but they'd never seen someone make the decisions you made with the stakes you were carrying. It wasn't courage, it was just the mission. No, the mission was to provide close air support until we could be extracted. You did that. Everything after staying on station with a dying aircraft, making additional runs, staying low where you were vulnerable, that was choice. That was you deciding that our lives mattered more than your safety. We understand the weight of that. Iris was quiet for a long moment, still looking at the aircraft. Finally she said, I had a brother, Black Hawk pilot. He made the same choice, tried to save his crew when his aircraft failed. He didn't make it. But his crew did, 3 of them, 3 out of 4. Then he succeeded. That's what we do, we accept mathematics that civilians can't understand. 1 for 3, 1 for 12. We do it because someone has to and because we're trained to be the ones who can." He pulled something from his pocket, held it out. "The team wanted you to have this." It was a photograph printed on cardstock, laminated for durability. The image showed Bronson's team immediately after their extraction, still in the landing zone, still processing survival. They were looking up, and following their gaze, Iris could see a dark silhouette against the morning sky, an A-10 trailing smoke, already beginning its damaged flight home. Someone had written on the back, "Revenant, noun. One who returns from the dead, one who makes sure others return as well." Iris took the photograph carefully, studied the image. She could remember that moment, pulling up from the final gun run, feeling the aircraft shudder with damage, knowing she'd done enough, knowing she'd get to try going home. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Not enough." Bronson's voice was flat, certain. "We'll never be enough, but it's what we have." The training program Iris developed over the next months became legendary within the A10 community. She didn't teach from manuals or PowerPoint presentations. She taught from experience, from the accumulated wisdom of thousands of hours flying an aircraft that most of the military establishment wanted to retire. She taught her students that close air support wasn't about the technology. It was about the relationship between pilot and ground forces, the trust that had to exist for the system to work. She taught them to fly low enough to see what they were shooting at, to understand that precision wasn't about weapons but about judgment. She taught them that the A-10 was ugly and slow and outdated by every modern metric, and also that it was the most effective platform ever designed for keeping soldiers alive, and those two facts didn't contradict each other. Her classes were brutal, demanding, uncompromising. She failed students who couldn't meet the standard, regardless of their previous performance. She pushed back against commanders who wanted to water down the curriculum, who thought modern warfare meant standoff weapons and network-centric operations. And she built a cadre of pilots who understood that sometimes the old ways persisted because they were the only ways that actually worked. But she also continued flying combat missions, because teaching was meaningless if she wasn't still doing the work herself. She led by example, taking the missions her students would eventually face, proving that the tactics she taught were viable. 6 months after Helmand, she was back in Afghanistan, leading a flight of 4 A-10s on an extended patrol along the Pakistan border. The mission was routine until it wasn't. A ground unit calling in contact, requesting immediate support, situation deteriorating faster than planned. Iris's wingman was a young captain named Rachel Torres, recent graduate of Iris's training program, first combat deployment. Torres had the tactical knowledge, the flight skills, the weapon employment certification. What she didn't have was the experience to know when doctrine was wrong, when the mission required breaking the rules everyone said were absolute. Iris could hear it in Torres' radio calls, technically correct but rigid, adhering to the book because the book was all she had. The ground commander was describing the situation. Enemy forces in a compound, civilians present, friendly forces in contact within 50 meters of the target. Standard protocol said no strike too close, too risky, too many variables. Torres was already starting to say they needed to pull back, get additional clearance, wait for a better solution. Iris cut her off. "Razor Element, this is Revenant lead. Torres, you're my wingman. Watch what I do, then tell me if the book was right." She rolled in before Torres could respond, diving toward the compound with the kind of precise aggression that looked reckless until you saw the result. The GAU-8 fired, short controlled burst, rounds impacting the specific corner of the compound where the ground commander had marked enemy positions. The building's corner disintegrated, but the rest of the structure held.